At my wife's work celebration dinner, I went to the bathroom. Two women walked in, her college friends. Not seeing me in the stall, one said, "Poor thing, he doesn't know she's filing for divorce next week." My stomach dropped. I returned to the table smiling and handed her a red envelope. She opened it beaming, until she read it. Her face turned white. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and for about 3 glorious seconds, you actually believe you're somebody important? Yeah, that's exactly how I felt strutting into Lamont's Steakhouse on that crisp Thursday evening in downtown Pittsburgh. The valet took my keys like I was driving something fancier than a 2019 Honda Accord with a questionable check engine light. And for a moment, just a brief, shining moment, I felt like the main character in my own life story. Spoiler alert, I was about to get demoted to extra number 3 real fast, and the director didn't even have the decency to warn me before yelling cut. Lamont's isn't your average chain restaurant where you can get away with wearing cargo shorts and pretending the menu prices don't make you sweat. No, this place screams old money and new pretension. We're talking cloth napkins so thick and luxurious, you could legitimately fashion them into a winter coat if society collapsed tomorrow. The lighting was that perfect dim amber that makes everyone look like they've either just gotten back from a Caribbean vacation or made a deal with a very reasonable demon. The kind of establishment where the waiters have better posture than most people's life choices, and the wine list requires a small business loan to navigate. But hey, tonight wasn't about me and my humble government employee salary. Tonight was all about Clara Brooks. Well, Clara Brooks for now, though I didn't know the expiration date on that last name was coming up faster than expired milk. My wife. My college sweetheart. The woman I'd supported through med school, career changes, and that weird phase where she tried to become a lifestyle influencer. She'd just been promoted to CEO of Morrison & Klein Consulting, and apparently, that warranted gathering every single person in her professional and personal orbit to celebrate like she'd just discovered the cure for Mondays. The guest list was a greatest hits album of people I'd learned to tolerate over the years. There was Richard Morrison, her boss, or former boss, I guess, since she was technically his equal now, a silver-haired guy who probably showered in cologne that cost more than my monthly car payment. Clara's parents were there too, sitting ramrod straight like they were attending a state dinner instead of a steakhouse celebration. Her mother, Patricia, had that look on her face that she always wore around me, like she was perpetually surprised her daughter had married someone who shops at Target. Her father, Donald, was at least decent enough to shake my hand earlier, though his grip suggested he was still trying to figure out if I was good enough for his little girl. Spoiler number 2. Apparently, I wasn't, but neither was she, so I guess we were even. Then there was the PR team from Morrison & Klein, 3 interchangeable people in expensive suits who'd spent the entire appetizer course talking about brand synergy and leveraging Clara's narrative. I nodded along like I understood what any of that corporate word salad meant, but honestly, I was just trying to figure out if it was socially acceptable to order a 3rd beer or if that would make me look like the working-class disappointment Patricia already thought I was. But the real stars of tonight's disaster preview? Tanya Chun and Bree Mitchell, Clara's college friends, and coincidentally, the 2 people on planet Earth who looked at me like I was a mistake that needed correcting. Tanya was in finance, which she reminded everyone of approximately every 11 minutes, and Bree worked in marketing for some startup that definitely wasn't as successful as she pretended it was on Instagram. They'd never liked me, not since Clara brought me home during sophomore year, and I'd committed the unforgivable sin of being too normal for their taste. Too normal. Like that was somehow worse than being a pretentious ass. I played my part though, because that's what you do when you love someone, right? I smiled until my face hurt, nodded enthusiastically at Clara's 4th rendition of her Women in Leadership in Male-Dominated Industries speech, which, don't get me wrong, was genuinely inspiring the first time, but by round 4 it was like hearing your favorite song overplayed on the radio until you wanted to throw the speakers out a window. I laughed at Richard's mediocre jokes about work-life integration and pretended I didn't notice Tanya and Bree whispering to each other every time I spoke, like I was some kind of exotic zoo animal that had accidentally learned human language. By the time dessert menus were being passed around, I needed a break before I said something that would get me divorced even faster than whatever timeline was apparently already in motion. "Excuse me for a minute," I announced to the table, standing up with what I hoped looked like casual confidence, and not the desperate energy of a man who'd consumed too much garlic bread and needed to escape before he said something he'd regret. Clara barely glanced up from her conversation with Richard about quarterly projections, just gave me that absent-minded sure, honey, smile that she'd perfected over the past year. The bathroom at Lamont's was almost as fancy as the dining room, all marble countertops and automatic everything. Like even taking a leak needed to be a luxury experience. I locked myself in one of the stalls. Not because I actually needed to use it, but because I needed exactly 90 seconds of solitude to collect myself and remember why I was putting up with this circus. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to center myself like one of those meditation apps Clara was always trying to get me to use. That's when I heard them. Heels clicking on tile, laughter echoing off the marble, and voices I recognized immediately. Tanya and Bree had walked into the bathroom. Well, the vestibule area outside the stalls, where apparently the universe had decided to host the most important conversation of my life. I froze. Not because I'm some kind of creep who hangs out in bathroom stalls eavesdropping. Let's be clear about that. But because opening the door and walking out at that exact moment would have been more awkward than a middle school dance, and my social anxiety made executive decisions without consulting me first. So I stayed put, phone in hand, trying to look like I was genuinely occupied if anyone happened to check under the door, and prayed they'd finish whatever mundane conversation they were having and leave. God, I almost feel bad for him, Tanya said, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a makeup compact snapping open. My stomach did a weird flip because when people start a sentence with, I almost feel bad, nothing good ever follows. Bree laughed, and it was that specific kind of rich person laugh that sounds like champagne bubbles and bad intentions. Almost. Girl, please. He has no idea what's coming. I stopped breathing. Completely stopped. If someone had checked my vitals right then, they would have called a code blue. Poor thing. Tanya continued, and I could practically hear her reapplying lipstick between words. Walking around here all supportive husband, smiling like a golden retriever, and he doesn't even know she's filing for divorce next week. The phone nearly slipped out of my hand. Divorce. Next week. The words hit me like a freight train made of betrayal and overpriced steak. My wife, the woman I'd spent 7 years building a life with, the person I'd supported through career changes and family drama, and that weird pyramid scheme phase her cousin tried to drag her into, was planning to divorce me. And apparently, everyone knew except the guy who actually needed to know. Clara's playing it so smart, Bree added, and I heard a purse zipper. Waiting until after the promotion bonus clears next Friday. She told me she's already got the papers drafted, just waiting for the money to hit her account, and then boom, served. They both laughed, casual as discussing weekend brunch plans, and then their voices faded as they walked back toward the dining room, leaving me sitting in a bathroom stall at a fancy steakhouse, staring at the door like it might offer me some kind of explanation for what the hell had just happened to my life. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been 30 seconds, could have been 10 minutes. Time does weird things when your entire reality shifts sideways. Eventually, I stood up, flushed the toilet for authenticity's sake, because even in crisis I'm unnecessarily considerate, and walked to the sink. The bathroom attendant. Yeah, Lamont's has a bathroom attendant, because of course it does. Offered me a towel with a sympathetic smile, like he could sense the existential crisis radiating off me. I washed my hands twice. Not because they were particularly dirty, but because I needed the ritual of it, the normalcy, the few extra seconds to stop seeing red and start seeing clearly. When I finally looked up at the mirror, I barely recognized the guy staring back. Same face, same slightly too long haircut I kept meaning to deal with, same tie Clara had picked out for me that morning. But different eyes. Harder eyes. The eyes of a man who'd just learned he'd been cast as the fool in someone else's master plan. All right, Adrian, I said to my reflection, keeping my voice low so the attendant wouldn't think I'd completely lost it. Time to audit this marriage. Because here's the thing about being a financial analyst for the government. I spend 40 hours a week tracking money, finding discrepancies, uncovering things people desperately want to stay hidden. Numbers don't lie. Paper trails don't forget. And if Clara Brooks thought she could plan an exit strategy without me noticing the evidence, well, she'd severely underestimated exactly who she'd married. I straightened my tie, grabbed a mint from the crystal dish by the door because even righteous fury deserves fresh breath, and headed back to the table with a smile on my face and a plan forming in my head. The show, as they say, was about to begin. Walking back to that table felt like one of those slow-motion movie scenes, except instead of explosions and dramatic music, it was just me navigating between tables of oblivious rich people while my internal soundtrack was screaming static. Every step was calculated. Smile? Check. Shoulders relaxed like I hadn't just discovered my wife was treating our marriage like a corporate merger she was ready to liquidate. Double check. Heart doing Olympic-level gymnastics in my chest while I pretended everything was absolutely fine. Gold medal performance, baby. I slid back into my seat next to Clara, and she looked up at me with those green eyes that I'd once thought were enchanting, but now realized were probably just really good at hiding daggers. She was radiant tonight, I'll give her that. The woman knew how to work a room. Her dress was this emerald silk number that probably cost more than my monthly salary. And yes, I'd bought it for her 3 months ago when she said she needed something powerful for her upcoming promotion announcement. Guess I'd unknowingly funded my own funeral outfit. The irony was so thick you could serve it with the filet mignon. You okay, babe? She asked, reaching over to touch my hand with what I'm sure she thought was genuine concern. Her nails were freshly done, that expensive gel manicure she got every 2 weeks at that salon in Shadyside. I'd always thought it was a waste of money, but hey, what did I know? I was just the guy paying for half of everything while apparently being scheduled for demolition. Never better, I replied, and I watched her face relax into this satisfied smile. She had no idea that in married couples speak, never better is right up there with we need to talk, and it's fine on the list of phrases that actually mean the complete opposite. It's the verbal equivalent of a warning siren, but Clara was too busy basking in her own success to notice the tornado forming right next to her. Her former boss, Richard Morrison cleared his throat and stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with that sound that makes everyone instinctively look over. He raised his crystal wine glass, the liquid inside catching the amber light like liquid gold, which was fitting because this whole evening was apparently about celebrating how golden Clara's future was about to be. Without me in it. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard announced in that booming voice that rich white guys seem to develop around the same time they get their first corner office. I'd like to propose a toast to Clara Brooks, our brilliant new CEO and the future of Morrison & Klein Consulting. Everyone grabbed their glasses like synchronized swimmers, all smiles and enthusiasm. Patricia, Clara's mother, looked like she might actually cry with pride, which was rich considering she'd spent the better part of 7 years looking at me like I was a participation trophy her daughter had won by accident. Donald raised his glass with both hands, probably because he'd already gone through 2 scotches and was working on his third. The PR team lifted their glasses in unison like they'd rehearsed it, which they probably had because everything these people did seemed calculated down to the nanosecond. Tanya and Bree were grinning like cats who'd just knocked over a fish tank and gotten away with it. Bree had this particular smirk that I now understood was probably less about celebrating Clara and more about the private joke they were all in on. The joke being me. The punchline sitting right here in his moderately priced suit from Men's Warehouse, clinking his glass like a trained seal. To Clara, Richard continued, really milking the moment. A visionary leader, a remarkable strategist, and someone who proves every single day that talent and determination know no gender boundaries. The company is lucky to have you, and I personally couldn't be prouder to call you my colleague. Everyone echoed the toast. To Clara, the sound of crystal clinking filled the private dining room we'd reserved, that specific high-pitched ring that fancy glassware makes when you're paying $40 for a pour. I clinked my glass too, right on cue, the perfect supportive husband executing his role flawlessly. But inside my head, I was already mentally drafting a very different kind of presentation. See, being a financial analyst isn't just about crunching numbers and finding tax discrepancies, though I do plenty of that for the IRS. And let me tell you, people get really creative when they're trying to hide money from Uncle Sam. It's also about pattern recognition. It's about seeing what doesn't add up, following the paper trail, and understanding that everything, absolutely everything, leaves evidence. Numbers are my first language, the thing I learned to speak fluently long before I mastered the art of small talk at dinner parties. And revenge? Revenge was rapidly becoming my second language, and apparently, I was about to become bilingual real fast. While everyone launched into enthusiastic conversation about Clara's promotion, I sat back and just observed. Really observed. This was information gathering time, and I needed to pay attention to every detail like I was auditing someone's taxes and knew they were hiding offshore accounts. Richard started talking about quarterly growth projections, throwing around numbers that were probably accurate, but delivered with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for announcing lottery wins. We're looking at a 37% increase in client retention, he said, gesturing with his wine glass like a conductor leading an orchestra. And with Clara at the helm, I anticipate we'll break into the pharmaceutical consulting market by Q2 next year. Clara was eating it up, nodding along, adding her own insights about leveraging synergies and optimizing operational bandwidth. Corporate speak. That beautiful language where people use 20 words to say absolutely nothing of substance. It's like they take normal English, run it through a translator set to pretentious nonsense, and then serve it up like it's profound wisdom. Synergy, bandwidth, paradigm shifts, all fancy ways of saying, we're going to try stuff and hope it works. I smiled and nodded, playing my part. The supportive husband who definitely understood what leveraging cross-functional integration meant. Sure, absolutely. I was leveraging my own cross-functional integration right now between wanting to flip the table and maintaining enough composure to execute what was rapidly forming in my mind. Tanya leaned over to Clara and said something I couldn't quite hear, but whatever it was made both of them laugh. That knowing laugh. The kind that comes with inside jokes and shared secrets. Bree joined in, adding her own comment. And suddenly all three of them were giggling like they were back in their college sorority house instead of a professional dinner celebrating corporate achievement. I wondered if they were laughing about me. Probably. The clueless husband who had no idea his marriage had an expiration date stamped on it like grocery store meat. The waiter appeared with dessert menus, those oversized leather-bound books that fancy restaurants use because apparently, listing 5 desserts on a regular piece of paper isn't sophisticated enough. Clara ordered the creme brulee without even looking at the menu. Her usual choice, the safe bet, the thing she always ordered because she didn't like taking risks with dessert. Funny how she was perfectly comfortable taking massive risks with, say, our marriage, but God forbid she try the chocolate souffle. Patricia ordered the fruit tart, because of course she did. Tanya and Bree decided to split the chocolate lava cake, which involved way too much discussion and negotiation for 2 people who were supposedly best friends. Richard waved off dessert entirely, probably watching his figure for his next executive photo shoot. Donald ordered another scotch, which wasn't technically dessert, but nobody was about to argue with him. I ordered the tiramisu, mostly because it gave me something to do with my hands and my mouth besides what I really wanted to do, which was stand up and announce to the entire table that I'd just overheard their little bathroom conspiracy. But that wasn't the play. Not yet. The thing about revenge, and I was learning this in real time, is that timing is everything. Rush it, and you blow the whole operation. Wait too long, and you lose your advantage. So instead, I sat there mentally building what I'd started calling my surprise package presentation. See, while everyone else was talking about Clara's brilliant future, I was calculating exactly what that future would look like without the safety net she thought she had. I was thinking about joint accounts, shared assets, the house we'd bought together 3 years ago in Squirrel Hill. I was remembering every late-night work session she'd claimed to have over the past 6 months, every unexplained charge on the credit card, every time she'd come home smelling like cologne that definitely wasn't mine. The desserts arrived, and Clara made a show of feeding me a spoonful of her creme brulee, that cute couple thing we'd done 1,000 times before. Isn't it amazing? She asked, her eyes bright with champagne and success and the confidence of someone who thought she was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. I smiled, tasting the burnt sugar and vanilla cream. It's perfect, I said. Absolutely perfect. And I meant it, because everything was falling into place. Every piece of information, every observation, every detail I'd been unconsciously collecting over the past months was suddenly crystallizing into a beautiful, terrible picture. Clara thought she was the chess master here, moving pieces around the board while I sat obliviously in checkmate. But here's what she forgot. I count things for a living. I notice discrepancies. I see patterns. And I've been noticing a lot lately. So while everyone toasted my wife and celebrated her ascension to CEO, while they talked about her brilliant future and her incredible achievement, I sat there with my tiramisu and my forced smile, quietly building a PowerPoint presentation in my head. Title slide: Surprises You Deserve, a comprehensive analysis of why you should have been more careful. The dessert course couldn't end fast enough. Dessert was winding down, and I could feel the evening starting to shift into that awkward phase where people aren't sure if they should order another drink or start making their polite exit excuses. Richard was checking his phone with that subtle glance that says, "I'm important and might need to handle business at any moment," which was probably just him checking his fantasy football scores. Patricia was dabbing her mouth with that ridiculously thick napkin, preparing her inevitable speech about how proud she was of Clara and how far she'd come. Donald was working on what I'm pretty sure was his fourth scotch, which meant he'd soon enter the phase where he'd start telling rambling stories about his own career in pharmaceutical sales back in the 80s. But me? I was in the zone. That special headspace where everything becomes crystal clear and time moves differently. Athletes call it flow state. Surgeons experience it during complicated operations. I was having it right now at a steakhouse table, surrounded by people who'd written me off as background noise, and I was about to deliver the performance of a lifetime. I reached into my inner jacket pocket slowly, deliberately, like I was going for something precious, which I was, technically, just not in the way anyone at this table would expect. My fingers wrapped around the red envelope I'd placed there earlier that evening, back when I'd still been that naive version of myself who thought tonight was just about celebrating my wife's success. Funny how much a person can change in the span of a bathroom eavesdropping session. The envelope was red because I'd specifically gone to 3 different stores to find the perfect shade. Not pink, not orange red, but that deep crimson that screams important occasion. The kind of red you see on Valentine's Day cards and warning signs. Appropriate for both love and danger, which was poetic as hell, if I did say so myself. I'd spent an embarrassing amount of time selecting it at Staples while the teenage cashier watched me compare different shades like I was picking out paint for the Sistine Chapel. "Everyone," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. Clear, confident. The voice of a man who'd found his purpose somewhere between the appetizers and the conspiracy revelation. Before we wrap up this amazing celebration, I have something for Clara too. The table went quiet, that anticipatory kind of silence that happens when people think something sweet is about to occur. Patricia's face lit up like I'd just announced I was donating a kidney. Even Richard looked interested, probably assuming I'd gotten Clara some expensive piece of jewelry that would make him look bad for only giving her a promotion. Clara's hand went to her chest in that exaggerated surprise gesture women do in jewelry commercials. "Oh my God, Adrian," she said, and her voice had that pitch that suggested she was genuinely touched. "You didn't have to do anything. This night is already perfect." "Oh, I really did," I replied, and I let that sentence hang in the air for just a second longer than necessary. Just long enough for the meaning to slip past her champagne-buzzed defenses, but not long enough for her to actually process it. "I couldn't let tonight pass without giving you something special. Something you deserve." I pulled out the red envelope and held it in both hands, presenting it to her like it was the Olympic torch or the nuclear launch codes. The table leaned in. Even Tanya and Bree, who'd spent most of the evening whispering to each other like mean girls in a high school cafeteria, were watching with interest. They probably thought I'd gotten Clara some romantic getaway trip or maybe a heartfelt letter expressing my undying support for her career. How adorable. How completely, devastatingly wrong. Clara took the envelope from my hands, her fingers brushing against mine in that familiar way that used to give me butterflies, but now just made me think about all the other hands she'd been holding lately. Her smile was radiant, genuine, the smile of someone who thought they were winning at life. She looked around the table, making sure everyone was watching her moment, because Clara had always loved an audience, always needed validation from the room. It was one of the things that had driven me crazy about her, this constant need for external approval. "Should I open it now?" she asked, playing coy, probably expecting me to suggest she wait until we got home for something more private and intimate. "Absolutely," I said, leaning back in my chair with my arms crossed. "I think everyone here should see this. After all, we're all family, right? All friends. All people who care about Clara's future." I made sure to make eye contact with Tanya when I said that last part. She smiled back, oblivious, probably thinking I was just being sentimental. Bree raised her wine glass slightly in acknowledgement, like she was toasting my devotion. The irony was so delicious I could taste it better than the tiramisu. Clara's perfectly manicured nails, the ones I'd indirectly paid for with our joint checking account, slid under the envelope flap. She was taking her time, savoring the moment, because she genuinely believed whatever was inside would be something wonderful. A love letter maybe. Concert tickets to see her favorite band. A reservation at some five-star resort where we could celebrate her promotion properly. The envelope opened with that satisfying paper tear sound, and Clara reached inside. I watched her face with the intensity of a scientist observing a chemical reaction, because I knew exactly what was about to happen, and I wanted to memorize every microsecond of it. Her hand emerged holding papers. Multiple sheets, neatly printed on official-looking letterhead. Her eyes scanned the first page, and I saw the exact moment comprehension hit her brain. It was like watching someone get unplugged from the Matrix. That split second where reality crashes through delusion like a wrecking ball through drywall. Her smile didn't just fade, it evaporated. Completely disappeared like it had never existed in the first place. Her skin, which had been glowing with champagne flush and success, drained of color so fast I briefly worried she might actually pass out. She went from woman on top of the world to person who just realized the world is actively collapsing beneath her in approximately 2 seconds flat. Adrian, she whispered, and her voice had lost all that confident CO authority. Now she just sounded small, confused. What is this? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table like we were having a casual conversation about weekend plans instead of the nuclear detonation of our marriage. Oh, just some light reading material. I thought it might pair well with the creme brulee. You know, something bitter to complement the sweet. Her hands were shaking now as she flipped through the pages. Page 1. Bank statements from the secret savings account she'd opened 6 months ago. The one she thought I didn't know about, where she'd been funneling money from our joint checking. Small amounts, 50 here, 100 there, nothing dramatic enough to trigger immediate suspicion. But over 6 months? It added up to almost $8,000. My $8,000, our $8,000, that she'd been stockpiling for her post-divorce independence fund. Page 2. Screenshots of email exchanges between her and Ethan Price, her harmless work mentor. And let me tell you, these emails were anything but harmless. They weren't quite explicit enough to be pornographic, but they sure as hell weren't professional either. Can't stop thinking about our meeting yesterday, and you make these late nights worthwhile, and my personal favorite. My husband doesn't understand me the way you do. Classic affair lines, the greatest hits of infidelity, wrapped up in timestamps that corresponded with all those nights she'd told me she was working late on the Morrison account. Page 3. More email screenshots. These ones detailing dinner reservations at restaurants I'd never been to, hotel stays charged to the company card under client development, and a particularly damning exchange where Clara told Ethan she was just waiting for the right time to make her exit. And page 4. Oh, page 4 was my masterpiece. Legal documentation, properly notarized and filed with the Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas, showing that I, Adrian Michael Brooks, had filed for divorce from Clara Elizabeth Brooks 2 days ago. Wednesday afternoon, to be precise, at 2:47 p.m., while she'd been in her big promotion announcement meeting. Her boss Richard was starting to look uncomfortable, his executive smile wavering like bad Wi-Fi. He leaned slightly toward Clara, trying to see what had caused such a dramatic reaction, but she clutched the papers to her chest like they were nuclear secrets. Something wrong, honey? I asked, and I made sure my voice was dripping with the kind of sweetness usually reserved for talking to toddlers or customer service representatives you're about to destroy with a perfectly worded complaint. You look a little pale. Should I get you some water? Maybe some truth serum? Oh wait, looks like you've already got plenty of truth right there in your hands. Patricia had her hand over her mouth, her eyes darting between Clara and me like she was watching a tennis match played with emotional grenades. Donald had actually set down his scotch, which for him was the equivalent of a 5-alarm emergency. The PR team had gone completely silent, probably mentally calculating how this would affect Clara's public image and whether they needed to start drafting crisis management strategies. But Tanya and Bree? Oh, Tanya and Bree were my favorite reactions. They'd gone absolutely rigid, frozen like someone had hit pause on them mid-gossip. Their faces were doing this amazing thing where confusion was battling with horror, was battling with the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, they shouldn't have been quite so chatty in that bathroom earlier. Clara tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing like a fish that had just realized it was no longer in water. Adrian, this isn't, you don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I interrupted, keeping my voice calm and measured. I understand that you've been planning an exit strategy for months. I understand that you wanted to wait until your promotion bonus cleared. Next Friday, right? That's when the money hits. I understand that you've been playing the devoted wife while essentially building a divorce starter kit behind my back. I picked up my wine glass and took a leisurely sip, letting the moment breathe. The thing is, Clara, you made one crucial miscalculation. The silence at that table was so thick you could have packaged it and sold it as insulation. Nobody was breathing. Nobody was moving. I'm pretty sure someone's watch stopped ticking out of pure shock. Even the waiter who'd been hovering nearby with a coffee pot had frozen mid-step like a really well-dressed statue, probably trying to decide if he should intervene or just let this train wreck play out so he'd have an incredible story for his other tables. Clara's eyes were darting around like a cornered animal looking for an escape route, but there wasn't one. Not at this table, not in this restaurant, not in this situation. She'd walked in here tonight thinking she was the queen on the chessboard, and she was just now realizing she'd been in checkmate for the last 3 moves without even knowing it. What miscalculation? She finally managed to whisper, and I had to give her credit for even being able to form words at this point. Her voice was shaking so badly it sounded like she was trying to talk during an earthquake. I set down my wine glass with deliberate care, making sure it made that satisfying little clink against the table. You married a financial analyst, sweetheart. Someone whose entire job is finding money that people are trying to hide. Following paper trails. Spotting patterns. Connecting dots. I gestured at the papers still clutched in her trembling hands. You really thought you could open a secret savings account, use our joint checking to fund it, and I wouldn't notice? That's like trying to shoplift from a security guard. It's not just stupid, it's impressively stupid. Richard Morrison had gone from uncomfortable to actively panicking. His face had that expression people get when they realize they're watching something career-ending happen in real time. He cleared his throat, trying to assert some kind of authority in a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's control. Perhaps we should. Oh no, Richard, I said, turning to face him with a smile that could have cut glass. Don't leave on my account. This is a celebration, remember? We're celebrating Clara's promotion, her success, her incredible future. Stay. Enjoy the show. I promise it's worth the price of admission, and considering you're paying for this dinner, you might as well get your money's worth. Patricia had recovered enough to try the maternal intervention approach. Adrian, I think maybe you and Clara should discuss this privately. Privately. I laughed, and it came out harsher than I intended, but honestly, harsh felt pretty appropriate right now. Patricia, with all due respect, and I mean that in the most technical sense of the phrase, privacy went out the window the moment your daughter decided to plan my removal from her life, like I was a bad piece of furniture she needed to donate to Goodwill. Besides, everyone here already knew about the divorce except me, right? So why start with privacy now? That got a reaction. Patricia's mouth snapped shut so fast I heard her teeth click. Donald reached for his scotch with both hands like it was a life preserver. And Tanya, beautiful, gossipy Tanya, had gone so pale she looked like she'd just seen her bank account after a Vegas weekend. I turned my attention to Clara's 2 best friends, these women who'd spent years looking down their noses at me like I was something unfortunate they'd stepped in. Speaking of everyone knowing, Tanya, Bree, how's the bathroom at Lamont's? Nice acoustics in there, right? Really carries a conversation. Bree's wine glass slipped from her fingers, not shattering, but landing on the table with a thud that splashed Merlot onto the white tablecloth like a crime scene. Tanya had gone from pale to red, that particular shade of crimson that happens when someone realizes they've been caught doing something monumentally stupid. The bathroom, Tanya started, then stopped, her brain clearly trying to calculate exactly how much I'd heard and how completely screwed she was. Yeah, the bathroom, I confirmed, nodding slowly. You know, The one where you two were touching up your makeup and discussing how poor Adrian doesn't even know his wife is filing for divorce next week. How Clara's playing it so cool, waiting for the bonus to clear before serving me papers. That bathroom. Ring any bells? Clara made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. She turned on her friends with a look of pure betrayal, and honestly, it was almost funny watching her experience what betrayal felt like after she'd been dishing it out for months. You told him? They didn't tell me directly. I clarified, because accuracy matters, even in the middle of nuclear warfare. They just happened to have their little gossip session while I was occupying a stall, wondering if I'd eaten too much garlic bread. Which, for the record, you can never eat too much garlic bread. That's a myth. But I digress. I picked up the papers that Clara had dropped onto the table, holding them up like I was presenting evidence in court. See, here's the thing that really gets me. It's not just that you want it out. Marriages end. People fall out of love. That happens, and it sucks, but it's life. I made eye contact with her, really looked at her, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with in college. The pre-law student who'd laughed at my terrible jokes and stayed up with me studying for finals and promised we'd figure out life together. But that woman was gone, or maybe she'd never really existed outside my imagination. What gets me is the calculation of it all. The strategy. Waiting for the money. Hiding accounts. The fact that you turned our marriage into a business transaction that you were quietly liquidating while still playing the loving wife. The PR team was trying to make themselves invisible, which is impressive for three people sitting at a table. They'd pulled out their phones and were clearly texting each other, probably already drafting crisis management strategies for how to spin their new CEO's very public marital implosion. And Ethan Price. I continued, flipping to one of the email printouts. You're a harmless mentor. Let's talk about Ethan for a second, shall we? Because these emails are really something special. You make these late nights worthwhile, I read aloud, doing my best impression of dramatic narration. Can't stop thinking about our meeting yesterday. And my personal favorite, Clara, this one really tugs at the heartstrings. My husband doesn't understand me the way you do. Clara was crying now, mascara starting to run down her cheeks in those dark streaks that would have been tragic if she hadn't spent the last 6 months systematically destroying our marriage while I smiled and supported her dreams. Adrian, please. Please what? I interrupted. Please stop. Please take this conversation somewhere private so you can try to salvage this disaster. Please pretend none of this happened so we can all go back to our regularly scheduled programming. I shook my head. Nah, I'm good. I've been quiet for months, Clara. Quiet while you worked late. Quiet while charges showed up on the card for restaurants I've never been to. Quiet while you slowly checked out of our marriage and started building your escape pod. I think I've earned the right to be a little loud right now. I turned back to the table, addressing everyone like I was giving a presentation at work, which in a way, I guess I was. Page 2 of your gift, Clara, that's the good stuff. That's where I've got documentation of the company laptop being used for personal communications with Ethan, which, unless Morrison and Klein has drastically changed their employee handbook recently, is probably a violation of company policy, especially when those personal communications involve discussing an affair and strategizing about divorcing your spouse. Richard's face had progressed from uncomfortable to actively horrified. You could practically see him mentally flipping through the HR handbook, calculating lawsuits and public relations disasters. The company laptop, he repeated weakly. Oh yeah, I confirmed cheerfully. Time-stamped emails sent from Clara's work computer during work hours, discussing matters that are decidedly not work-related. I'm not a lawyer, but I feel like that might be relevant to somebody. HR maybe? Legal department? Random gossip sites that love this kind of corporate drama. I wasn't actually planning to leak anything to gossip sites. I'm petty, not vindictive, but Richard didn't need to know that. Let him sweat a little. Let him wonder if his shiny new CEO was about to become a liability before she'd even warmed up her executive chair. And here's the real kicker, I said, pulling out the final document with a flourish that would have made a game show host proud. Page 4. Legal documentation showing that I filed for divorce 2 days ago. Wednesday afternoon, while you were in your big promotion meeting, I was sitting in Margaret Chen's office. She's a lawyer, great reviews. You should look her up, filing the paperwork. I even paid extra for expedited processing. Consider it an investment in my future happiness. Clara was full-on sobbing now, and part of me, A very small, very distant part that still remembered loving her. Felt bad about doing this so publicly. But that part was being thoroughly outvoted by the rest of me that remembered sitting in that bathroom stall, listening to her friends laugh about how clueless I was. I also took the liberty of consulting with the top 3 divorce attorneys in Pittsburgh, I added casually, like I was discussing weekend plans instead of strategic divorce warfare. Just consultations, you understand. But here's a fun fact about lawyer consultations. Once they've consulted with me, they can't represent you due to conflict of interest. Isn't that interesting? So when you go looking for legal representation, you're going to find your options somewhat limited. Not impossible, just limited. Tanya had her head in her hands. Bree was staring at her lap, like she'd find answers in her designer dress. Patricia looked like she wanted to ground both me and Clara, which would have been impressive considering we were both in our 30s. Donald had finished his scotch and was trying to flag down the waiter for another one, probably hoping enough alcohol would erase this entire evening from his memory. I stood up, straightening my tie and buttoning my jacket like I was preparing to leave a business meeting instead of the smoking crater of my marriage. So here's what happens next, Clara. You're going to hear from my lawyer, that's Margaret, remember her name, regarding the actual divorce proceedings. We'll be discussing asset division, which should be interesting considering that house we bought. I put down 70% of the down payment. The car you drive? Title's in my name. That savings account you thought was secret? Joint property, which means I get to claim half in the settlement, which is ironic justice if I've ever seen it. I raised my water glass. I'd switched from wine because I wanted to be completely sober for this, and smiled at the table. So let me propose my own toast. To Clara Brooks, soon to be Clara Bennett again, I suppose. The future ex-wife who taught me that trust is basically a subscription service that auto-renews until you actually check your statements. May your promotion bonus cover your lawyer fees. May Ethan be worth the career consequences. And may you always remember that sometimes the quiet guy keeping the books is paying a lot more attention than you think. Here's the thing about catching someone cheating. It's never one big obvious sign that smacks you in the face like a cartoon frying pan. It's 1,000 tiny things that your brain starts collecting without you even realizing it. Like some kind of subconscious detective working overtime in the background of your mind while you're trying to convince yourself that everything is fine. Spoiler alert, everything was not fine, and my subconscious detective had been screaming at me for months before I finally started paying attention. It started about 6 months ago, right around the beginning of April. Tax season, ironically enough, which is when I'm at my most paranoid about numbers and patterns because I spend 40 hours a week catching people trying to pull fast ones on the IRS. Clara came home one night and announced she'd be working late more often because Morrison & Klein was pursuing this huge pharmaceutical contract, and she needed to be all hands on deck for the pitch process. Made sense. She'd been gunning for a promotion for years, and big contracts meant big opportunities. I was supportive. I made her favorite pasta dinner and told her I'd handle the household stuff while she focused on work. What a guy, right? What a trusting, supportive, absolutely clueless guy. The late nights became a pattern. 3 nights a week turned into 4, then 5. She'd text me around 7 saying she'd be home by 10, then 10 would become 11, then midnight. And look, I get it. Sometimes work genuinely demands that kind of commitment. But here's what my analyst brain started noticing. Her timesheets didn't match her stories. See, Morrison & Klein uses this software called Time Tracker, and Clara had given me access to the family calendar sync feature years ago, so I could see her schedule and plan around it. Useful for coordinating date nights and making sure someone remembered to pick up the dry cleaning. Except the calendar started showing discrepancies. She'd tell me she was working until 11 on the Morrison pitch, but Time Tracker would show her clocking out at 6:30. That's a 4.5-hour gap that needed explaining, and traffic was terrible. Only works as an excuse if you live in Los Angeles, not Pittsburgh. So I started keeping a spreadsheet, because of course I did. I'm an analyst, spreadsheets are literally my love language. Date, time she said she'd be home, time she actually got home, reason given, timesheet data. Just tracking patterns, telling myself I was being paranoid, and this was a healthy way to work through my anxiety instead of confronting her. Then came the Uber receipts. We have a joint credit card. Had a joint credit card, past tense now feels more appropriate, that we used for pretty much everything because it had good cashback rewards. 2% on dining, 3% on gas. the usual middle-class optimization strategies. I'm the one who reconciles the statements each month because Clara always said she found it tedious, which I now realize was less about tedium and more about not wanting me to look too closely at where money was going. But I do look closely. That's literally what I do for a living. And I started noticing Uber charges that ended at addresses I didn't recognize. Jazz lounges in Lawrenceville, wine bars in Shadyside, a hotel in downtown Pittsburgh, the Fairmont, fancy choice, with a charge labeled as Morrison & Klein Business Development. Except when I cross-referenced that date with her timesheet, she'd been clocked in at the office until 7, and the Uber charge to the Fairmont was at 7:15. Business development that starts after work hours and requires a hotel? That's either the worst planned client meeting in corporate history or something else entirely. The perfume was another tell. Clara has worn the same perfume since college, Marc Jacobs Daisy, that light floral scent that I used to associate with coming home to someone who loved me. But around May, I started noticing different scents on her when she came home late. Heavier, muskier, definitely masculine. The first time, I convinced myself she'd hugged a coworker goodbye and picked up their cologne. The fifth time, that excuse was wearing thinner than my patience. And then there was the phone situation. Clara had always been pretty casual about her phone around me. Left it on the counter while she showered, didn't bother with a passcode for years, the behavior of someone who had nothing to hide. But suddenly, around the same time as the late night started, the phone became surgically attached to her person. She took it everywhere. Bathroom, shower, even to check the mail. She added a 6-digit passcode, and when I casually asked about it, she said something about company security requirements. Plausible, except I knew for a fact that Morrison & Klein didn't have any such requirement because I'd actually read through her employee handbook one night when I couldn't sleep and was looking for answers in all the wrong places. But the real smoking gun, the thing that made me stop lying to myself and start planning, was discovering the secret savings account. That happened completely by accident, which is how the best detective work always happens, apparently. I was looking for our mortgage statement in her home office, and I knocked over a stack of papers on her desk. Basic klutz moment, nothing sinister. But when I was picking everything up, I saw a bank statement from Citizens Bank. We don't bank at Citizens Bank. We bank at PNC, have for years, joint checking and savings, everything transparent and above board. So naturally, I looked at the statement. And there it was, an individual savings account in Clara's name only, opened in March, with deposits that matched exactly the weird little charges I'd been noticing on our joint checking. $50 here for groceries that never materialized in our fridge. $100 there for gas, when her car had a full tank. $75 for pharmacy, when neither of us were on any medications. Death by 1,000 paper cuts, except instead of dying, she was building herself a nice little nest egg. Almost $8,000 by the time I did my full investigation. 8,000 of our dollars, my dollars, our shared resources, quietly being funneled into her escape fund. That's when I stopped being the trusting husband and started being the financial analyst. I went full forensic accountant on our entire financial life. Every receipt, every credit card statement, every transaction for the past 6 months got entered into a master spreadsheet with categories, timestamps, and cross-references. I created a separate encrypted folder on my laptop labeled Tax Documents 2024 because I knew Clara would never voluntarily look at anything tax-related. Inside that folder, a complete dossier of her affair. I tracked the Uber receipts and mapped out the destinations. I noticed that Sophie in her contacts, supposedly a work friend, texted her at weird hours and with a familiarity that felt off. So I did something I'm not particularly proud of but won't apologize for. I checked her laptop, the one issued by Morrison & Klein, which she often left open on the kitchen counter while she was getting ready in the mornings. Company property, technically, which made me feel slightly less guilty about what I was about to do. I didn't hack anything. Didn't need to. Clara's email was already open, and she had the password saved in her browser because she's brilliant at corporate strategy, but apparently terrible at digital security. And there they were, months of emails with Ethan Price, her mentor at the firm. The progression was almost textbook, started professional enough, strategy discussions, and client notes. Then it got more personal. Comments about how much they enjoyed working together. Inside jokes. Late-night messages that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with two people who were definitely crossing lines they shouldn't be crossing. The smoking gun email came in June. Clara wrote to Ethan, "I've decided to file after the promotion bonus clears. No point giving him ammunition to go after my money. We've worked too hard to let him take half of everything I've earned." She was talking about me, her husband, the guy who'd supported her through her career changes and celebrated every win and picked up the slack at home so she could focus on climbing the corporate ladder. I was him, the obstacle between her and Ethan and whatever fantasy future they'd cooked up together. That's when I made the decision. I wasn't going to be the clueless husband who gets blindsided. I wasn't going to wait around for her to serve me papers on her timeline, making me the reactive party scrambling to protect myself. I was going to flip the script so hard she'd get whiplash. First call I made was to Margaret Chun, a divorce attorney in Shadyside with a reputation for being absolutely ruthless but fair. Consultation appointment for the following Tuesday. I took a personal day from work, told Clara I was helping my buddy Mike move furniture, and instead spent 2 hours in Margaret's office laying out everything I'd discovered. She listened, took notes, and at the end said something I'll never forget. "Your wife made 3 critical mistakes. 1. She underestimated you. 2. She left a paper trail that would make a breadcrumb trail look subtle. 3. She didn't file first. Let's make sure she regrets all 3. Margaret and I filed on Wednesday afternoon, 2 days before the steakhouse dinner. Rush job, expedited processing, cost me an extra $500, but worth every penny." While Clara was in her promotion announcement meeting, celebrating her ascension to CEO, I was signing paperwork that would make her celebration very short-lived. But I didn't stop there. Margaret had given me a pro tip that bordered on brilliantly petty. Consult with the top divorce attorneys in the city. Just consultations, establish a conflict of interest, make it harder for Clara to find representation. So I spent the next 2 days meeting with lawyers. Daria Hollings at Steel City Family Law, Robert Patterson at Commonwealth Advocates, Jennifer Wu at Pittsburgh Divorce Solutions. Told them all the same story, showed them all the same evidence, paid for consultations I didn't technically need just to lock them out of Clara's reach. Was it playing dirty? Absolutely. Did I care? Not even a little bit. If you think the steakhouse dinner was the grand finale, you'd be wrong. That was just the opening act. The real show started on Monday morning when the corporate machine started chewing up Clara's carefully constructed professional image and spitting it out like bad cafeteria food. I didn't go into work Friday. Took a personal day, stayed home with Max, our golden retriever and the only innocent party in this entire mess, and watched trashy TV while eating ice cream straight from the container like I was the protagonist in a rom-com dealing with a breakup. Except I wasn't sad. I was vindicated. There's a difference, and it tastes a lot better than sadness. Tastes like cookies and cream Haagen-Dazs and the sweet satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly. But Monday? Monday I walked into my office at the IRS Federal Building in downtown Pittsburgh like I owned the place. And here's the thing about working for the government. Gossip travels faster than our actual internet connection. I hadn't even made it to my desk before people were giving me looks. Not pity looks, which is what I'd expected. These were respect looks. Impressed looks. The kind of looks you give someone who just pulled off something legendary. My cubicle neighbor, Derek Chun, was waiting at my desk with 2 cups of coffee like he'd been staking out the place. Derek's a good guy, works in audit enforcement, has 3 kids, and a wife who legitimately scares me. "Bro," he said, handing me a coffee. "I need to know if the rumors are true." "What rumors?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what rumors because I'd watched them spread across social media over the weekend like wildfire in California. Someone at that dinner, my money was on one of the PR team, had apparently posted about the most dramatic dinner of my entire life, without names. But Pittsburgh's professional community is small enough that people connected the dots faster than a kindergarten activity book. That you served your wife divorce papers at her CEO celebration dinner in front of her entire company. Derek was practically vibrating with curiosity. In a red envelope, with evidence of her affair. "Please tell me it's true because if it is, you're officially my hero." I took a sip of the coffee, black, no sugar, the way I liked it, and smiled. I neither confirm nor deny the alleged events of last Thursday evening. "Oh my God, it's true." Derek sat on the edge of my desk, which was against office protocol, but nobody cared because apparently I was now the office's unofficial entertainment. Dude, that's the most badass thing I've ever heard. My wife showed me the Reddit post about it. Someone wrote it up like a revenge story. 18,000 upvotes. There was a Reddit post. Of course there was a Reddit post. This is what happens when you publicly detonate your marriage in the age of social media. It becomes content. I made a mental note to never, ever read it because I didn't need to know what strangers on the internet thought about my personal life, even if they apparently thought I was some kind of folk hero. But the real story, the stuff that actually mattered, was happening across town at Morrison & Klein Consulting. I didn't know all the details immediately, but information has a way of traveling, especially when you know people who know people. My buddy Jake works in IT at a firm that does contract work for Morrison & Klein, and he texted me Monday afternoon with the subject line, "Dude." Apparently, Clara had come into the office Monday morning trying to project confidence and normalcy, like nothing had happened, like her personal life hadn't just exploded across Pittsburgh's professional scene like a poorly contained chemical spill. She'd walked in wearing what Jake's contact described as power suit armor. Probably that gray Armani number she'd bought for client presentations. Her hair perfect, makeup covering whatever emotional damage had been done over the weekend. But here's the problem with trying to pretend everything's fine when it very clearly isn't. People talk. Her coworkers had heard things, seen things. Some of them had been at the dinner or knew people who were. And by Monday morning, everyone at Morrison & Klein knew that their shiny new CEO had been having an affair with Ethan Price using company resources, had been caught red-handed, and was now facing a very public, very messy divorce. By lunchtime Monday, according to Jake's intel, HR had called both Clara and Ethan into separate meetings. The company had to investigate because I'd been thoughtful enough to document that they'd been using company laptops, company email, and company time to conduct their little romance. And Morrison & Klein, like most corporations trying to avoid lawsuits and bad publicity, had very strict policies about workplace relationships and even stricter policies about using company resources for personal matters. Ethan got suspended immediately. Full stop. Do not pass go. Do not collect your paycheck until we figure out what to do with you. They escorted him out of the building by Tuesday afternoon with a cardboard box of his desk belongings like he was a character in a movie about corporate downsizing. I heard through the grapevine. Okay, through Jake, who heard it from his contact, who heard it from someone in Ethan's department, that his wife Jennifer had found out about the affair over the weekend. Apparently, someone had been kind enough to send her screenshots of the emails. I have no idea who would do such a thing. None whatsoever. Jennifer filed for divorce on Monday morning, citing infidelity and irreconcilable differences, which made Ethan's week about as fun as a root canal performed by an angry dentist. Clara didn't get suspended, but she got something worse. She got the corporate equivalent of probation. HR launched a full investigation into her conduct, which meant lawyers going through her work emails, her calendar, her expense reports, everything. They were looking for policy violations, and given what I'd already documented, they were going to find plenty. The pharmaceutical contract she'd been working on, the one that had supposedly required all those late nights, turned out most of those strategy sessions were actually dinner dates and hotel visits. The company wasn't thrilled about potentially having to explain to clients why their CEO had been billing personal romantic endeavors as business development. By Wednesday, the story had leaked to one of those corporate gossip newsletters. You know the type, the ones that professionals pretend they don't read but absolutely devour on their lunch breaks. Trouble in Paradise. New CEO's rocky start was the headline, and while they didn't use Clara's name directly, they included enough details that anyone in the Pittsburgh business community knew exactly who they were talking about. Morrison & Klein's stock price didn't tank or anything dramatic, but there were definitely some uncomfortable questions being asked by board members and investors about leadership stability and corporate culture. Clara's big Women in Leadership speaking engagement at the Greater Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce canceled. The organizers cited scheduling conflicts, which is corporate speak for "we don't want the controversy." Her profile feature in Pittsburgh Magazine about breaking glass ceilings delayed indefinitely, probably forever. The podcast interview she'd scheduled with that business leadership show quietly removed from their upcoming episode list. Meanwhile, back at my office, I was getting treated like I'd won the Super Bowl. My boss, Patricia Henley, no relation to Clara's mother, thank God, called me into her office Wednesday morning, and I genuinely thought I might be in trouble for creating a distraction or bringing personal drama into the workplace. Instead, she closed the door, looked at me seriously, and said, "Adrian, I'm sorry about your situation, but I have to say, the way you handled that took planning and precision. Very analytical, very thorough. Those are qualities we value in this department." Then she approved my promotion to senior financial analyst, a position I'd been gunning for since last year. Was it directly related to my divorce drama? Probably not officially. But did my newfound reputation as someone who could execute a complex plan flawlessly help? I'm not saying it did, but I'm also not saying it didn't. By Thursday, less than a week after the steakhouse incident, Ethan Price had been officially terminated from Morrison & Klein. The company released a vague statement about policy violations and conduct unbecoming of the firm's values, which was corporate speak for, "This guy screwed up, and we're covering our asses legally." His LinkedIn profile changed to "seeking new opportunities" within hours, which is the professional equivalent of updating your Facebook status to "it's complicated." Clara survived at Morrison & Klein, technically. She kept her CEO title, kept her office, kept her salary. But her reputation? That was damaged goods. The promotion she'd worked so hard for, the leadership position she'd sacrificed our marriage to achieve, was now permanently tainted by scandal. Every meeting she walked into, every client presentation she gave, every board discussion she participated in would be colored by the knowledge that she'd gotten caught having an affair and using company resources to facilitate it. And me? I was doing just fine. Better than fine, actually. I had my promotion, my dignity, my dog, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the quiet guy keeping the books wins. 3 weeks after the steakhouse incident, I found myself sitting in a conference room at Margaret Chen's law office, staring across a mahogany table at Clara and her attorney, a middle-aged guy named Robert Fletcher, who looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else. The conference room had that specific smell all law offices seem to have: expensive leather, old books, and the faint scent of broken dreams. Very on-brand for divorce proceedings. Clara looked rough, and I don't mean that in a petty, vindictive way. I mean she genuinely looked like the past 3 weeks had aged her a decade. The designer clothes were still there, but they hung differently on her now, like she'd lost weight from stress. Her hair, usually styled to perfection, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, or at least not the full-face situation she usually did. Dark circles under her eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide. She looked like someone who'd been sleeping about as well as I had right after I overheard that bathroom conversation, which is to say not at all. Part of me, that small, stupid part that still remembered being in love with her, felt a twinge of sympathy. But then I remembered the secret bank account, the affair, the plan to divorce me on her timeline after securing her bonus, and that sympathy evaporated faster than water on a Phoenix sidewalk in July. Margaret sat next to me, looking like the legal equivalent of a shark in a designer pantsuit. She had her laptop open, 3 color-coded folders arranged in front of her, and an expression that suggested she was about to enjoy this meeting way more than was probably professional. I'd paid her a substantial retainer, and she was definitely earning every penny. Robert Fletcher cleared his throat and shuffled some papers, doing that thing lawyers do when they're about to deliver bad news, but need to make it sound reasonable. "Thank you all for coming today. I think we can handle this matter civilly and come to an agreement that works for both parties." "Both parties," Margaret repeated, and I could hear the amusement in her voice. Interesting choice of words, considering one party was planning a unilateral exit strategy using marital funds while conducting an extramarital affair on company time. Fletcher winced. Clara stared at the table like it might offer her an escape route. Let's try to keep this productive," he said weakly. "Oh, absolutely." I agreed, leaning back in my chair with the confidence of a man holding all the cards and knowing it. Productivity is important. So let's be productive. What's your opening offer? Fletcher glanced at Clara, who gave a barely perceptible nod. He pulled out a document that looked depressingly official. "My client is willing to negotiate a 50-50 split of all marital assets. The house would be sold, proceeds divided equally. Vehicles remain with their current primary drivers. Bank accounts split down the middle. We believe this is fair and equitable given." No, I said simply. Fletcher blinked. I'm sorry. I said no. That's cute that you think we're starting negotiations at 50-50, but that's not happening. I looked at Margaret, who was smiling like a cat who'd just spotted a particularly slow mouse. You want to walk them through why? Or should I? Oh, please, Margaret said, gesturing to me like a game show host revealing a prize. Be my guest. I pulled out my own folder, not as fancy as Margaret's color-coded system, but effective, and slid a document across the table. Let's talk about the house first. That lovely 3-bedroom in Squirrel Hill that we bought 3 years ago for $450,000? I put down 70% of the down payment. That's $63,000 of my money compared to Clara's $27,000. The mortgage has been paid primarily from my account because Clara's contributions mysteriously decreased about 6 months ago when she started funneling money into her secret Citizens Bank savings account. Clara's face went red. Fletcher looked at the document, then looked at her like a disappointed father. Clara, we discussed full financial disclosure. It gets better, I continued, warming to my topic. The car Clara drives, that Lexus RX she loves so much, title's in my name. I bought it outright 2 years ago as an anniversary gift. She's welcome to it, but she'll need to buy me out at fair market value, which according to Kelley Blue Book is approximately $32,000. I slid another paper across the table. Then there's the secret savings account. $8,417, to be exact. Money transferred from our joint checking over a 6-month period in amounts small enough that I guess Clara thought I wouldn't notice. Spoiler alert, I noticed. That's marital property obtained through what's technically financial fraud, which means in a divorce settlement, I'm entitled to claim not just half, but potentially all of it as punitive damages. Fletcher was scribbling notes furiously, probably realizing his client had given him about 10% of the actual story. Clara was crying now, quiet tears that she was trying to hide by staring at her lap. Old Adrian would have stopped, would have felt guilty, would have backed off. New Adrian had been forged in the fires of betrayal and was made of sterner stuff. Should we discuss the stocks? Margaret asked sweetly. I think we should discuss the stocks. Oh, the stocks, I said. Yeah, let's talk about those. Clara received stock options as part of her compensation package at Morrison & Klein. Those options were granted during our marriage, which makes them marital property. Now, normally we'd split them 50-50. But considering Clara used company resources to conduct an affair, which resulted in company investigations and potential policy violations, those stocks might be subject to clawback provisions. But I'm feeling generous, so I'll only take half. Fletcher was looking increasingly uncomfortable, like a man who'd signed up for a simple divorce case and found himself in the middle of a financial forensics investigation. Mr. Brooks, I understand you're upset, but... Upset? I laughed, and it came out harsher than I intended. Robert, can I call you Robert? I'm not upset. Upset is when your favorite restaurant runs out of the dessert you wanted. I'm something way beyond upset. I'm methodical. There's a difference. Margaret pulled out her own documentation, a thick stack of papers that made Fletcher's folder look like a pamphlet. We're prepared to be reasonable, she said, in a tone that suggested reasonable was a very relative term. My client is willing to accept the house, his vehicle, half of all stock options granted during the marriage, and full custody of the dog. The dog. Clara spoke for the first time, her voice cracking. Adrian, you can't take Max. Watch me, I replied. Max is registered in my name. I'm the one who feeds him, walks him, takes him to the vet. You're at work 80 hours a week. Sorry, you're at work 50 hours a week and with Ethan 30 hours a week. When exactly were you planning to care for a dog? That hit her hard. I could see it in her eyes, the realization that I wasn't just taking assets. I was taking our life apart piece by piece, keeping the parts that mattered and leaving her with the shell. Fletcher tried one more time. My client is willing to negotiate on the dog if we can reach a reasonable agreement on the financial assets. Your client, I interrupted, doesn't get to negotiate from a position of strength. She violated our marriage, violated company policy, and tried to strategically time a divorce to maximize her financial benefit. Margaret has documented everything. Every Uber receipt, every hotel charge, every email with Ethan. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Easy way, she accepts my terms. Hard way, we go to court and I present all of this evidence to a judge who probably won't look kindly on marital fraud and affair-related misconduct. The room went silent except for the sound of the air conditioning humming. Clara was full-on sobbing now, and Fletcher looked like he wanted to bill her double for the stress. "What are your final terms?" he finally asked, defeated. Margaret smiled. "My client keeps the house, his vehicle, his dog, and 50% of all stock options. Mrs. Brooks keeps her vehicle pending buyout payment, her personal effects, her separate accounts, including that secret one, and whatever relationship she has with Mr. Price, though I understand he's currently unemployed." I stood up, buttoning my jacket. "You've got 48 hours to accept or reject. After that, we file motions and this gets messy." I looked at Clara one last time. "You wanted to plan your exit? Congratulations. This is mine. You know that satisfying feeling you get when you line up dominoes perfectly and then watch them all fall in sequence? That's basically what happened over the next 2 months, except instead of plastic game pieces, it was people's lives and reputations, and instead of feeling guilty about it, I felt like I was watching the universe finally balance its own books. First domino, Ethan Price's marriage. Remember how I mentioned someone might have sent his wife Jennifer those incriminating emails? Well, Jennifer Price wasn't the type to sit around and process her feelings through therapy and meditation. No, Jennifer was a corporate litigator at one of Pittsburgh's biggest law firms, which meant she had the legal knowledge, the financial resources, and the professional vindictiveness to absolutely destroy Ethan's life with surgical precision. She filed for divorce exactly 1 week after the steakhouse incident, and her filing wasn't some gentle, irreconcilable differences situation. Jennifer went nuclear. The court documents, which somehow made their way to various legal gossip channels, definitely not through me, cited adultery, financial misconduct, and emotional abandonment. She demanded full custody of their 2 kids, the house in Fox Chapel, his retirement accounts, and spousal support. The cherry on top? She included printouts of his emails with Clara as exhibits, which meant they became part of public record. Ethan tried to fight it initially, hired some mediocre attorney who probably gave him hope that he could negotiate something reasonable. But you can't negotiate with a corporate litigator who's personally motivated and professionally equipped to ruin you. By the end of month 1, Ethan had moved into a studio apartment in Bloomfield, was seeing his kids every other weekend under supervised visitation because Jennifer convinced the judge he was emotionally unstable, and was working at a mid-tier consulting firm making about 60% of his Morrison & Klein salary. His LinkedIn went from senior strategy consultant at Morrison & Klein to independent business consultant, which is professional code for unemployed but trying to sound important. I didn't feel bad for him, not even a little bit. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, as the kids say. Second domino, Clara's social circle. Remember Tanya and Bree, the bathroom gossips who'd inadvertently given me the heads up about my impending divorce? Yeah, they ghosted Clara faster than a Tinder date, who just saw a red flag parade. I heard through the grapevine, and by grapevine, I mean my new friend Marcus who works at the gym where Tanya's husband Chad goes, that both women had completely cut ties with Clara after the scandal broke. Turns out, being associated with workplace affair drama isn't great for your own professional reputation, and both Tanya and Bree had their own careers to protect. Tanya worked in finance where reputation is everything, and Bree's startup was trying to attract investors who probably wouldn't love being connected to scandal-adjacent people. So they did what self-serving people do best. They saved themselves and threw Clara overboard like cargo during a storm. Clara tried texting them, from what I gathered through mutual acquaintances. Tried calling. Even showed up at Tanya's house one weekend, which resulted in a very awkward doorstep conversation that the neighbors definitely heard and absolutely discussed at their next book club meeting. But Tanya and Bree had made their choice, and that choice was self-preservation over friendship. The rest of Clara's friend group followed suit. Her yoga class buddies stopped saving her a spot. Her book club mysteriously started meeting on nights she couldn't attend. The women she'd networked with at those professional development conferences suddenly had very full calendars when she tried to grab coffee. In the span of about 6 weeks, Clara went from having a robust social network to being essentially persona non grata in Pittsburgh's professional women's circles. Third domino, Clara's reputation. And this is where things got really interesting, because watching someone's professional reputation collapse in the age of social media is like watching a building demolition in slow motion. Fascinating, a little horrifying, and absolutely impossible to stop once it starts. The Reddit post Derek had mentioned? It blew up. Someone had written up the entire steakhouse incident like a revenge fantasy story, and it hit every popular subreddit. Relationship advice, petty revenge, pro-revenge, nuclear revenge. People were sharing it on Twitter, LinkedIn, professionally reframed, of course, and Facebook. Someone even made a TikTok series analyzing the strategic brilliance of my approach, which felt surreal to watch while eating leftover pizza on my couch. The red envelope divorce became a whole thing. People started using it as a reference point. I'd overhear conversations at coffee shops. If my partner ever cheats, I'm going full red envelope on them. My story became shorthand for calculated, public revenge, which was flattering and weird in equal measure. At work, I became a legend, not just at my office, but throughout the federal building. People I'd never met would nod respectfully when I walked by. The cafeteria lady started giving me extra cookies with my lunch. Even the security guards knew who I was. "Hey, red envelope guy," one of them said while checking my badge one morning. Respect, man. Absolute respect. Someone created a meme using a stock photo that vaguely looked like me, holding a red envelope with increasingly creative captions. My personal favorite: when she thinks you don't know about finances, but you literally audit people for a living. It got shared about 50,000 times across various platforms. My niece sent it to me asking if it was actually me. I neither confirmed nor denied. The professional community in Pittsburgh treated me like I'd pulled off a heist. At networking events, which I started attending more frequently post-divorce because why not? People would introduce themselves and then inevitably ask, "Wait, are you the guy?" And I'd smile and change the subject, but the damage was done. I was that guy, the legend, the man who'd served divorce papers at a celebration dinner and walked away like an action hero. Meanwhile, Clara's reputation went in the exact opposite direction. Morrison and Klein kept her on as CEO, but everyone knew she was damaged goods. Clients started requesting other consultants. Her Women in Leadership brand was essentially dead. Articles that had been planned about her success were quietly shelved. She'd become a cautionary tale instead of an inspiration. And me? I was thriving. Promotion at work. New apartment with a killer view. Gym membership that I actually used. A dating life that was surprisingly active once word got around that I was single. Life was good. The dominoes had fallen exactly as they should. 3 months after the steakhouse incident, I was living a life I barely recognized, and honestly, I wasn't mad about it. If someone had told me back in January that by October I'd be the guy with a downtown apartment, a dating life, and abs that were starting to exist as actual distinct entities rather than theoretical concepts, I would have laughed and gone back to my comfortable routine of microwave dinners and Netflix binges. But here I was, living proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just becoming the best version of yourself while your ex watches from the sidelines. The apartment was probably my favorite upgrade. I'd moved out of the Squirrel Hill house, which was technically mine per the settlement, but held too many memories of a marriage I was actively trying to forget, and into a 2-bedroom loft in downtown Pittsburgh. 16th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city skyline that made me feel like I was living in a movie about successful people instead of actually being one. The place cost more than I'd normally spend on rent, but I figured I'd earned it. Consider it a divorce present to myself, funded partially by the extremely generous settlement Margaret had negotiated on my behalf. Max loved it too, though he was confused about why we suddenly had hardwood floors instead of carpet and why his backyard had been replaced by a balcony where he could watch pigeons but not chase them. He adapted though, because dogs are resilient like that. Unlike humans, who need therapy and self-help books and 3 months of emotional processing to handle major life changes, Max just needed his favorite tennis ball and regular meal times. I envied his simplicity. The gym membership was new too. I joined this place in the Strip district called Iron and Grit, which sounds like a CrossFit cult, but was actually just a solid gym with good equipment and people who minded their own business. I started going 4 times a week, partly because I needed to do something productive with all the nervous energy that comes with dismantling your entire life, and partly because spite is an incredible motivator. There's nothing quite like the mental image of running into your ex-wife while looking noticeably better than you did when you were married to really push you through that last set of bench presses. I hired a trainer too. This guy named Marcus, who I mentioned earlier, the one who gave me intel about Tanya's husband. Marcus was one of those naturally enthusiastic people who could make burpees sound exciting, which should be illegal, but somehow worked. He had me on a program that was actually showing results. My clothes fit better. My face looked less like exhausted government employee and more like guy who has his life together. People noticed. I noticed them noticing, which fed into a positive feedback loop that kept me motivated. The cooking thing started as a necessity and became something I actually enjoyed. Turns out when you're not trying to coordinate dinner with someone else's schedule, you can actually experiment and make mistakes and eat cereal for dinner without judgment. I bought one of those fancy cast iron skillets, watched way too many YouTube cooking channels, and learned to make things that didn't come from a box or a delivery app. Nothing fancy. I wasn't becoming a chef or anything, but I could make a decent stir-fry, grill a steak without setting off the smoke alarm. And my pasta carbonara was legitimately good enough that I'd started making it for dates. Which brought me to the dating situation. I'd downloaded the apps, Hinge, Bumble, the usual suspects, with extremely low expectations and a profile that my friend Derek helped me write after rejecting my initial attempt, which apparently made me sound like a tax form with abandonment issues. But once I updated my photos to include ones from my new apartment and post-gym glow-up, the response was surprisingly positive. Turns out, recently divorced government analyst with a revenge story that went viral is apparently an intriguing dating profile element. Who knew? I went on a bunch of first dates that went nowhere. Coffee with Amanda, who talked about her cats for 45 minutes straight. Dinner with Rachel, who spent the entire meal on her phone. Drinks with Kelly, who asked if I could help her commit tax fraud, which was both insulting to my professional integrity and wildly illegal. But then I met Jade at a networking event. She worked in marketing for a tech startup downtown, and something clicked. Jade thought my story was hilarious, which was refreshing after dates with women who either found it intimidating or saw me as damaged goods. That's the funniest plot twist I've heard since Michael Scott left The Office, she'd said over our first dinner together at Butcher and the Rye. She had this laugh that made everyone around us smile, and she didn't take herself too seriously, which after years with Clara felt like drinking water after being lost in a desert. We'd been seeing each other for about a month now, nothing too serious yet, just enjoying each other's company without the pressure of defining what we were or where it was going. She'd met Max, who approved immediately because Jade had the good sense to bring dog treats to our third date. She hadn't met my friends yet because I was taking things slow, learning from past mistakes, not rushing into anything just because it felt good. For the first time in years, I wasn't the supporting character in someone else's story. I was the main character in my own life, and honestly, the narrative was pretty damn good. People ask me sometimes if I miss her. Usually it's at parties or networking events, after a few drinks when the conversation gets personal and someone inevitably brings up the red envelope incident, like it's a historical event that needs commemorating. They ask with this mixture of curiosity and concern, like they're trying to figure out if I'm secretly broken inside despite the new apartment and the gym membership and the general air of having my life together. My answer is always the same. Sure, I miss her like I miss dial-up internet. Which is to say, not at all. And also, what kind of psychopath would voluntarily go back to dial-up when fiber optic exists? You don't downgrade your life once you've experienced the upgrade. And trust me, post-Clara life is definitely an upgrade. Faster connection speeds, fewer dropped calls, and significantly less buffering while trying to figure out what's actually happening in my own marriage. The thing is, I learned something beautiful through this whole disaster. Revenge doesn't need to look like a movie. It doesn't require elaborate schemes with fire and explosions and dramatic confrontations in the ring. Sometimes the best revenge is just math, patience, and confidence. Numbers on a spreadsheet. Paper trails that don't lie. The willingness to wait for exactly the right moment to reveal that you've been paying attention all along. Clara thought I was 3 moves behind when I was actually 6 moves ahead. She thought I'd stay quiet forever, that I was the kind of guy who'd just accept whatever happened to him with a resigned shrug and a well, I guess that's life. She made the critical mistake of underestimating the quiet guy who tracks spending for a living, who notices patterns, who literally gets paid to find money people are trying to hide. You can't outsmart someone whose entire job is catching people who think they're being clever. It's like trying to outswim a fish. Technically possible, but statistically unlikely and definitely not recommended. I still remember that moment at Lamont's when she opened that red envelope. The way her face transformed from million-dollar smile to million-dollar lawsuit in about 3 seconds. The way reality crashed through her carefully constructed fantasy like a freight train through tissue paper. That moment, that precise instant when she realized I knew everything and had been planning my own exit while she thought she was the mastermind. That moment made every late night compiling evidence worth it. 6 months later, I'm sitting on my balcony with Max at my feet, watching the Pittsburgh skyline light up as the sun sets, and I realize something profound. Closure doesn't always come from conversations or apologies or mutual understanding. Sometimes closure comes gift-wrapped in a red envelope, served at a steakhouse dinner, with a side of public humiliation and a legally binding divorce settlement. Clara got her CEO position. She got Ethan, at least until he became too much baggage to carry. She got exactly what she wanted, just without the safety net she'd planned on having. And me? I got my life back. Got my dignity. Got a dog who loves me unconditionally and a girlfriend who thinks my strategic approach to divorce is hilarious rather than terrifying. Got a promotion, an apartment with a view, and the kind of peace that comes from knowing you handled a nightmare situation with precision and grace. The ledger is balanced. The books are closed. And honestly, that's the best ending I could have asked for. Sometimes the quiet guy wins. And when he does, he doesn't gloat. He just moves forward, lives well, and lets the dominoes fall where they may. Game over. I won.